begin it now. Whom do we talk to? Anyone, everyone, everyone. So serve to change lives, 'cause lives can be changed forever. Serve to change lives whenever we're working together. Talk to someone right now. Start now and wow. When the right time arrives, you'll see you've changed lives. So serve to change lives, 'cause lives can be changed forever. Whenever we're working together, talk to someone right now. Start now and wow. When the right time arrives, you'll see you've changed lives. So serve to change lives.
Good evening, Rotarians and guests. My name is Claire Gregg and I'm your MC for tonight's meeting of Rotary Melbourne. Firstly, we'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and pay our respects to their elders past, present and future. We also extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians present today. Also, just a quick note that most microphones have been muted for the duration of the presentation. However, any accolades, comments and questions can be posted via the chat function at any time throughout the presentation. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 19th meeting of the Rotary year and our monthly evening meeting. We're very pleased you could all make it tonight. It's also my great pleasure to welcome our guest speaker, David Locke, who is the CEO and Chief Ombudsman of the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. David will shortly be speaking on diversity and inclusion in organisations and will be more fully introduced shortly by our Chair of the Day, Sana Malik. A warm welcome to you both. And just a reminder that our club evening meetings this year are led by a team of members who were just shown on the slide. We plan to have an evening meeting every second Wednesday of the month, and in the new year we hope to be meeting in a hybrid format. We also welcome suggestions from all members of suitable guest speakers for the program. And now I'll pass the meeting to Sana to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you for that, Claire. David is the inaugural Chief Executive and Chief Ombudsman at AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, which started on the 1st of November 2018. AFCA is the new one-stop shop dispute resolution body, which provides consumers and small businesses with access to a free, fast and binding service for financial complaints. Just a quick biography on David. So he commenced with AFCA on the 25th of June 2018. He was previously Assistant Commissioner of the Charities Services at the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. Prior to that, he was Executive Director of Charity Services at the Charity Commission of England and Wales, where he had responsibility for the strategic leadership and operational delivery of the Commission's one-to-one services to charities. He has worked as an advisor to several international governments on the regulation of non-government organisations. And prior to all of that, he was a qualified lawyer in the UK, where he started his career in community legal centres, where he spent over 10 years managing the delivery of services to the public. David has served as a board member and volunteer of a number of charities and not-for-profits. And with that, I'd like to give David a very warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Sana. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and good evening, everybody. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you this evening about a subject that is very close to my heart, diversity and inclusion. Before I start, though, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet and their elders past and present and emerging. And I do this because I too want to show respect. In my case, respect to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation for their ownership and custodianship of the beautiful land I'm on. But First Nations people in Australia are some of the most incarcerated people on earth and have been experiencing exclusion, discrimination, and oppression for so long. When I was born in 1966, Aboriginal people weren't even included in the population of Australia, as we know. And recognising as the true custodians of the land is a small acknowledgement and a small display of respect. And really, respect is at the heart of what I want to talk about this evening. When Sana invited me to talk, it was an offer I could not refuse. We work closely together at the Australian Financial Complaints Authority. And I know that diversity and inclusion is something that Rotary takes very seriously and is really your focus, or one of your main focuses, I think, for this year. I've known Rotary all of my life, and through my work at the Charity Commission in the UK and also with the Australian Charities Not-for-Profits Commission, as you've heard, I've seen the impact that Rotary makes to the lives of people around the world. Rotary is really a force for good in the world. And speaking as a former charity regulator, I'm very proud to be able to engage with you this evening. Also, personally, when I was 16 years old, my local Rotary in the UK sponsored me to go on an international youth camp to Bonn in Germany that was organised by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And that involved bringing together young people from countries right across Europe. And we studied together, and we actually volunteered our time as well, tending to the graves of young soldiers, many of whom were not much older than ourselves. And that was a really moving and significant experience for me as a young person that would not have been possible without Rotary support. So it may be 39 years too late, but I would like to say thank you to Rotary in respect of that. It's also poignant, of course, because tomorrow is Remembrance Day, where we will mark the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month as the moment the guns fell silent on the Western Front after the appalling bloodshed of World War I. What I'd like to talk about this evening is that I'll say a few words about AFCA and what we're doing there, and then I'll talk about why I believe diversity and inclusion is so important for all organisations. So AFCA is the Ombudsman service for the financial services sector. So we resolve disputes that members of the public have with financial firms, such as banks, insurers, superannuation funds, financial advisors, and others. We handle over 70,000 disputes a year, and we are constantly dealing with parties in dispute. So every day of every year, Sana and myself are dealing with individuals who have got disputes with a financial firm or financial advisor. And the matters we consider are really important to people, and they can have an awful lot at stake. It can involve people's life savings, it can involve business insurance, it can involve the home that they live in. So it's very difficult for individuals who have a dispute, but it's also very difficult for the individual financial firms themselves and people involved in financial firms. If you have a complaint made against you, I think we all know that that can feel very personal, feel very threatening, and particularly if you feel it isn't justified. So actually treating everybody fairly and doing a proper job in terms of investigating and trying to resolve matters is not always an easy task, but we do our very best. We've been going for just 3 years. Already we were established as well in the middle of the Royal Commission into banking and financial institutions. And already over 210,000 people have had their matters resolved by AFCA. And over $700 million in compensation has been paid to people, many of whom would have been unable to pursue their matters themselves. Like Rotary, we are a not-for-profit organisation, but what I prefer to describe ourselves as a for-purpose organisation. And although not part of government, we play an important national role. We were established by the government and are really for the benefit of the whole community. And that's important because we know that for most people, going to court is too expensive or too difficult. It's really out of reach for individuals. And even if people are able to go to court to try and pursue a complaint, then if they lose, the implications of having costs orders awarded against them can be just ruinous. So for many people, actually, the only remedy, the only route that people have if they have a dispute that they can't resolve is really to come through to us. Now, because we're dealing with people right across the community, and we're dealing with financial firms right across from very large international institutions through to mom and pop businesses or sole traders, it's really important that we have a service that's accessible to everybody. And it's really important that we actually take diversity and inclusion seriously. You know, we live in Australia in a very diverse society. Many people speak different languages, have different educational abilities, different financial literacy. We know many really struggle with financial services and financial products. People, particularly more recent migrants, may have a limited understanding of Australian law or financial products. People have different backgrounds, different economic situations, different health needs, different experience based upon age or on different challenges. And because our client base is really all consumers of Australian financial services products and the vast majority of financial firms, that gives us a challenge. And that's why one of the reasons we put diversity and inclusion as a central theme. So how can one organization assist all of these? Well, I believe you can only even start to do so if you have a diverse workforce yourself that in some way mirrors the community that you serve. So you understand different needs and perspectives. And I think that gives you different ability to talk to different communities or to engage with different stakeholder groups. We can't successfully resolve complaints unless we understand where people are coming from with their issues, and unless we have at least a bit of insight into what it might feel like to walk in their shoes. And so this then informs our approach to recruitment, to training, to the whole organizational culture of AFCA. Now, many parts of the financial services sector are dominated by white middle-aged blokes in suits who look very much like me. But even in the financial services sector, we are seeing change happen, even at board and senior executive level. And when we look at AFCA's people and the diversity of our staff, currently 41% of our workforce actually are people from culturally and linguistically diverse communities. 35% of our workforce are people who are born overseas. 56% are women and 69% of our senior leadership team. 10% of our staff identify as LGBTQA, but only 6% of our people describe themselves as having a disability, and only 1% are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander backgrounds. So you see, if we as an organization are seeking to reflect the general community, well, in some demographics, we're doing quite well, but in other demographics, we still have significant work to do. And that's going to be the case for all organizations. But really what I'm talking about here is diversity, not inclusion. So diversity is really about representation. It's really about, you know, what does your workforce look like? What does your customer base look like? Are you broadly reflective of that? And I think that that's important. But one of the reasons I think it's really important is it just gives you diversity of thought. So it's not just for the sake of it. It really, if people come with different backgrounds and different experiences, that means that when you're having a conversation about difficult issues or challenging things, people have got different approaches and ideas. And you know, if you work as a group around something like that, then you end up coming with something that is a much more thought through. If everybody has got the same experience and background, then everybody's coming at things in the same way. You can just miss the whole picture, really, of what is going on. But if you're going to look at diversity, I think you do need to find a way to measure that, and you do need to gather data about your people, but also about the people who are using your service. And often what I see is people are actually quite squeamish about asking people for data around any of this demographic information. Very often people don't want to ask people their age, or they don't want to ask people, you know, how they would describe their ethnic background, because people can feel threatened by that, or it can feel very intrusive. And I do understand that. I think that actually you have to create a safe environment where people will feel comfortable to provide that sort of data. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in advance. Many people have experienced discrimination, and so it's perfectly understandable that people are suspicious if you start asking for that sort of information. And we see that whether we are talking to members of the public and trying to gather that information. People say, well, why does that matter? But you also see it if you are asking your workforce as well. I'm always shocked by how many people, both in Australia and the UK, tell me that when they anglicize their names, they got interviews and approaches that they just never got really before. So I think, you know, we can always sort of see some of those challenges. And indeed, in the UK, with one of my previous employers, I introduced as part of our recruitment process a 3-stage application form. So the name and personal information was on part A, then the substantive form was on part B, you know, why somebody would be suitable for the job, and then the references were on part C. And the panel only actually got the relevant bit about the job and experience. They didn't get the name, and they didn't get who the references were. And when we did that in the UK, what we actually found was, and we monitored this before, after, and evaluated the whole thing, this was an organization where everybody was trained on diversity and inclusion. Everybody was trained on recruitment practices. It was an organization that held itself out as a really exemplar of good practice, you know, saw itself as a really progressive organization. And when we did this, what we actually found was that the percentage of candidates who were getting interviews, called for interview, who identified as coming from Black or Asian backgrounds, increased 50%. And people were shocked. The whole organization was shocked. People were shocked. But actually, it demonstrates really that in everybody, there are unconscious biases and assumptions that people make, even in people who are well-meaning and don't choose to do so. So I do think, you know, you have to measure some of this, and you have to look at demographic information in the same way as we are used to with gender, actually looking, is there actually a pay gap? You know, what does actually the facts and figures show? Is there a gender pay gap, and how do you report on that? And I think with other diversity issues as well, unless you actually do that in that sort of structured way, you may not even know that there is an issue that's going on. I think that if you are looking, though, at the reason for promoting diversity and inclusion, a diverse workforce will bring a greater range of skills and experience, provide greater innovation and creativity than if you have a sort of monocultural workforce with similar backgrounds. And I've got first-hand experience of this again from the UK, where I've seen different workforces and cultures in different regional offices. I worked in an organization that, for example, had a number of offices, including one in central London, one of the biggest, most multicultural cities in the world, and an office in Taunton in the West Country. Now, if ever you've watched BBC TV shows Escape to the Country or Midsummer Murders, then I think you will have a bit of an idea about what Taunton is like. Beautiful spot, lovely, but the culture could not have been more different. In one small office, I had in one team a mother, a father, a son, and a daughter from the same family. And that's fine when they get on, but as soon as there's a bit of a rift, you have a bit of an issue, or as soon as the family want to go on holiday. But you know, the idea of that ever happening in central London is just sort of incomprehensible. So very different cultures and very different experiences. And in the UK, of course, you only need to go about 20 miles to have different regional accents as well. So, you know, really makes some of the differences that we talk about between, say, Sydney and Melbourne office cultures really seem completely insignificant. With an organisation such as AFCA, where all the time we're trying to solve problems and issues, that diversity of thought is important. But before we started, I started talking, we were talking a little bit about the current recruitment market, and we were talking about some of the challenges, for example, in hospitality in terms of getting people. Well, at the moment, we're in a really unusual time. I think I saw that job adverts for skilled labour are at a 13-year high. Businesses are crying out for people right across industries. And there's something going on that people are reporting about called the Great Resignation. So I think a lot of people have been locked in at home, thinking about what's important to them. And a lot of people are choosing to make life changes, choosing to make career changes. Some of that is to do with people being simply fed up and wanting a change. Some of it is to do with really using this opportunity to evaluate what's important to you. But I think that shows that in that sort of market, it's really vitally important that you are, if you are looking for people, that you are really open as an organization to people from different backgrounds with different experiences. And you are fishing in as many talent pools as you can, really. And so diversity inclusion is so important for any business to thrive, really. It should be about getting the best people into your organization. And you will only do that if you are a diverse and inclusive organization. In every organization that I've worked throughout my career, I've seen examples of people recruiting to type. So effectively leaders recruiting people who are just like them, whether that is people who've gone to similar schools or universities, quite a bit of that in the UK, a bit of it here. I don't get asked which school I went to because people can tell straight away I'm a POM, but you know, I've heard stuff around that. Which suburb you live in seems to be a question that people ask a lot, as well as which footy team, which I don't support any, so I'm a bit of a freak on a number of levels. But you know, it's quite common that organizations and individuals recruit people like themselves in various different ways, and you see that. The problem is that, you know, the problem is that that often is, you know, is done business sense. I mean, it may be discriminatory and illegal as well, but it definitely means that organizations are missing out on talent. Often people talk about fit. Well, would they fit in to the organization? Or are they a good cultural fit? And you hear quite often that about individuals. I sometimes think a better question is whether people will actually enrich your culture rather than just mirror what you've already got. And so I will often challenge around that. You know, it's not about having people who are all the same, who, you know, will all agree with you. You want actually you want diversity of thought and a bit of challenge and a bit of difference, really. And so that's something really that we really try and embrace. Other situations you see as well, people through recruitment processes are really setting in requirements such as people must have 5 years experience doing this in this type of organization, or 10 years experience doing this in this kind of organization. And sometimes that is completely unnecessary. But again, what it often does is perpetuate the pool of people who you may be able to recruit from. And again, it can be counter to getting a diverse workforce and diverse thought. My career over the last 34 years has taught me that attitude, potential, whether people are smart, and whether people have got varied life experiences is often a better determination of success, rather than whether they've been doing exactly the same thing for 10 years and not necessarily developed in that as well. I want AFCA to recruit from the widest talent pool, and I want people who will enrich our organisation. But for me, diversity is also personal, and I've seen through my life and career how people are treated by organisations that are not diverse and are not accessible. So I'm a gay man. I came out in 1985, the same year that Rock Hudson died of AIDS. My formative years at university and through my 20s were against a backdrop of big hair, bad fashion, but also AIDS. So at that time, HIV meant a death sentence. Discrimination against gay people in the UK escalated. And I was involved in the first ever legal centre for people living with HIV and AIDS through the 1990s, when people were being sacked, evicted, bashed and disowned because of the pandemic. For gay men and for some other communities, it was really our first global pandemic, and I lost friends and know many whose lives were unalterably changed. I spent 11 years also working in a community legal centre in central London, as Sana said, all through the 1990s and into the early 2000s, acting for people who were often excluded and who felt powerless. So using the law to give some people power and redress, whether that was women in abusive relationships, young people leaving care, whether it was people who are homeless, tenants in social housing, refugees and asylum seekers seeking access to services, or people living with mental health and addiction problems. I know, because I've seen close hand, how people are often treated by large organizations. And I've seen up close how that feels to people who are excluded and who are impacted in that way. I also know the difference it makes if an organization is accessible, if its services are supportive, and if its people care and have empathy. My personal story, my great-grandparents, I've been doing, like many of you, a bit of ancestry.com over the lockdown period, and I found my great-grandparents. And one of the startling things for me was that all of them marked their name with a cross. So I found that even going back just to my great-grandparents, they were all illiterate. My grandfather and my father both left school at 14 and went straight down the coal mine. My grandmother cleaned offices, and when my father left the pit, he and my mother ran a corner shop, in Aussie terms, a milk bar, for 30 years. And they were wonderful parents, but they never had educational opportunities. And I know how much, I can recall how much my father struggled with financial matters and with writing letters. And when I was a teenager and onwards, I used to help him with all of that. And that's a similar story to many small business owners in Australia as well. And of course, we know many migrant families set up businesses to employ themselves and employ family. For some, this is the only option, but for others, it is really what people know and are able to do. And I can only imagine what the challenges must be in a different culture with a different legal system when English is your second, your third, or even your fourth language. So I think, if you can place yourself in those sorts of situations, it gives you a bit of a perspective as to what people who are struggling with some of the systems and approaches will feel. And also it challenges you as a leader in an organization to see, well, what can we do to outreach? An example of an initiative that we've had at AFCA, which is intended really to support people better from culturally and linguistically diverse communities, has been the production of a series of multilingual resources using videos and other material in 20 different languages, using our own people speaking their first language, their family language as well. And each video, a member of AFCA's team explains how AFCA can help with financial complaints and how they can get in touch. And this is just a small example of a range of things that we do to try and reach out to different communities. Like many of you, I was the first member of my family to go to university, and it was education and this alone that distinguished my life opportunities from those of my parents, my grandparents, or my great-grandparents. But as a young gay man growing up when I did, I never believed that working for the government would be a possibility at all. And that may seem very strange, but I genuinely never believed that that would be a possibility, never even entered my head. I saw the government wanting to ban and prosecute me. I didn't see me ever having a role there. And even with the law, when I went into the law, I was very hesitant, and I was deeply skeptical that there would actually be a place for me. And when I went into the law, I actually deliberately chose a progressive North London practice where I thought I might be able to fit in. So even at that age, and in quite recent times, their self-censorship and lack of confidence may seem strange, but it was incredibly real for me as an individual. And if you told me that in 2021, I'd be living in Australia, I'd be a new Australian citizen, I'd be establishing the Australian Charities Not-for-Profits Commission and now AFCA, I would not for a single moment have believed that any of that was possible. And of course, now I'm part of the establishment, and you see me as this establishment figure, but I still may see myself as really an outsider, and still striving to provide access to justice. So why do I say any of this? Why am I telling all this sort of personal stuff? Well, I'm doing it to try and explain why diversity is personal to me. My work, my personal and professional experiences obviously shape me, but they give me a little bit of understanding what it might be like to be an outsider, or to be a minority, or to fear or to expect discrimination. I understand that I would be much more inclined to trust and use an organization where I see diversity reflected in its many forms and colors, not just through its people, but also through its statements and messaging. I too would be much more willing to apply to work or to volunteer or participate in an association or an organization if its website, its social media, its statements about diversity were there. I too would be looking for indicators. And for Rotary too, the challenge is, how do you display yourself? How is Rotary thought of in the general community? Would people who were new migrants, who perhaps had no experience of Rotary in their home country, would they see Rotary as an association for them? How do you reach out across all communities? And so I do think, in a way that doesn't exclude others as well, I do think that's the challenge really for all of us. So that's diversity, or a bit about diversity from my perspective. But what about accessibility? Well, accessibility is fundamental as an organization. So how do schemes like ours assist people to really to be able to submit complaints, to be able to go through the process? And things like translation services I've talked about are important tools that you can provide. But it's also about recognizing that some people are particularly susceptible to consumer detriment, particularly in relation to financial products. We're in the middle of scam week at the moment. Who hasn't had phone calls, random phone calls from people all the time? I've had conversations with very, very senior people within banks who've told me that they've been scammed, and other financial institutions. Everybody is getting this at the moment. There's no shame in this. It's really absolutely prolific. But some people, particularly, for example, older people who may have landlines, are particularly susceptible to this. People with other vulnerabilities, such as mental health, injury, loss, family violence, are also really susceptible to some of this. So it's about recognizing as well that, that not everybody is in the same place, and some people will need extra assistance. And that's really important when we're looking at our services. How do we provide flexibility, empathy, and understanding? The sorts of barriers or disadvantage we look at in terms of AFCA, we look at things such as mental or physical capacity. We look at race or ethnicity. We look at age. We look at health status, educational attainment. We also look at geographical location and income status as well, because some of these are relevant to some of the challenges that we're dealing with. But for me, success in this space is really around recognizing diversity and supporting internal and supporting inclusion, really. And so some of the things I'm looking for when I'm looking at feedback we get about our service, I'm looking at, did people feel they were rushed? Did people feel they were listened to? Did we go that extra mile? You all know what it's like to deal with an organization where people are reading a script at you and trying to get you off the phone as quickly as they possibly can because they've got to meet KPIs. And you know how different that is if you're talking to somebody who's genuinely listening to you, who's trying to assist you even if you don't understand what's going on, and is not getting frustrated with you. Now, do we get this right all the time? No, but is this what we're trying to do? Absolutely it is. It's really about trying to tailor and trying to support people who may be very stressed and may be very confused about what's going on. So far I've been talking quite a bit about diversity and a bit about accessibility as well. But really, what about inclusion? So diversity is about representation and visibility, and that's where some organizations start and finish. So this is our gender mix, this is our percentage of employees living with a disability or from CAL backgrounds or whatever. But as we know, that can be just entirely tokenistic. You can go through all that, but actually the organization isn't inclusive. The organization isn't welcoming, doesn't really want difference, doesn't really value difference. And without inclusion, the benefits of diversity will never be realized. People will never give their best. People will never really be able to contribute. Employees will leave. People will see it for what it is, a spin as well. And like risk, some of this can be very tokenistic, or people think, oh, I develop a policy and we do this and therefore that means this. It doesn't at all, really. It's what is the experience of people who work or volunteer there? Do people really feel included and a sense of belonging? Are people really valued? What do those percentages actually show? Is it all that people at lower grades fill some of those demographics, but actually when you get to the top, it doesn't actually change? So some of this is really important. And for me, I think organizational culture is really what shapes and ultimately drives this. The culture, the feel of an organization is really what shapes either the employee or the customer experience. And inclusion is really about giving people a sense of belonging or connection, and connecting with each other, so people are empowered to share ideas. At AFCA, we've been doing a piece of work really with people across our organization, trying to define the culture that we want, and also looking at diversity and inclusion as part of that. And at the center, we have a statement that our passion for inclusion sets us apart. And what we're trying to do here is commit us as an organization to celebrate the diversity we have across our people, and across our customers and community. And as Sana knows, we do this in a variety of ways, and some are very simple, such as celebrating a wide range of religious and cultural events, both internally and externally, encouraging people to share their stories and their life experiences as well across the organization, if they're comfortable to do so, bringing in a range of external speakers, supporting different networks and groups amongst our people, running accessibility programs, encouraging staff not just to use their language skills in videos, but also in presentations. And as we get to face back into community groups and community engagement as well. And from myself, trying to role model a welcoming and inclusive style, and building this then into the leadership framework of the organization, and trying to explain what that means to each individual within the organization. All of us, I think, as human beings want to belong. I think there's something really quite fundamental. If you think of kids going to school, one thing kids want to do is belong. They don't want to stand out. I don't want my mates, seeing you take me to the gate or whatever it may be. It's about, one of the joys I think of parenthood, I think, is probably being able to embarrass your children, but and that never fades as well. But I think all kids fundamentally are hardwired. I think people are hardwired to want to belong, and I think with organizations as well, the need to be part of something bigger than ourselves is really quite fundamental. It's in our DNA. And we know that organizations that successfully drive diversity and inclusion and belonging experience a significant uplift in innovation, collaboration, employee engagement. And that leads to customer satisfaction as well. And if you're running a business that relies upon customers, that's so important. The customer experience, the customer satisfaction is so important. And I fundamentally believe that you cannot deliver that unless your people are happy and want to be there. So for me, it's absolutely integral. You know, if you've got staff who do not want to be there, or are not happy and not engaged, or don't feel that they belong, you are never going to deliver excellent customer experience, and you're never going to thrive. So even if you don't believe from a values proposition that this is fundamentally the right thing to do, from a business proposition, it is fundamentally the right thing to do as well. You want to get the best talent you can. If you treat people well, you will deliver good customer service. You will make money. You will retain customers. And for an organization like ours, you will have a bigger impact as well. But we know that this isn't easy, and you know, getting this right isn't always easy either. And sometimes people are embarrassed or squeamish to embark on some of this work. But fundamentally, it's really about creating a culture and creating an organization where diversity and inclusion and belonging is felt by all your people. And that's really throughout their career with you. As you can see, I'm pretty passionate about this stuff. And I truly believe that actually, if you make this part of an organization's DNA, that actually your organizations will thrive. I hope that some of what I've shared with you this evening resonates or is of interest. I'm not an HR professional. I can't give you any HR theory or practice. I've shared a bit about, you know, some of my experiences and some of what we're doing at AFCA. But I hope that in some way generates a discussion. And I look forward to seeing what Rotary do next as well. So I'm happy to open up for questions or discussion.
Yeah, thank you for that, David, and fascinating from your experience. And I guess we've got a large range of questions to ask you. Just to kick off, first, just maybe going to your early discussions, David, we've got a great question from our president, Reg Smith, that basically discussed the masking candidate names. So when you're talking about percentages of disability and age, etc., masking candidate names and other details, is that the only way really to address unconscious bias? And from your perspective, are there any other ways to address the issue?
Well, I think you have to look at the panels, really, the recruitment panels and composition of recruitment panels. That is certainly one way to do it. I think you should look at that. I think training is really important, Reg. And I do think monitoring that as well, the data collection, albeit anonymous and albeit voluntary, is a key part of that as well. Certainly, it's fascinating when you do see names, you know, and it's fascinating when you do talk to people around this. I've spoken to a number of staff who have, as I said, have changed their names, and they were saying we were getting no interviews for places. And actually, once they changed their names, they were getting interviews. And I was talking to somebody just the other day who then turned up for interview, he said, in an organization, and was told, you know, they assumed that he wasn't the right person and walked into the wrong room. And then they actually said, oh, we were expecting somebody German. So this is in 2021. And this is what people are saying. So I'm not saying they're bad people, but, you know, we delude ourselves if we don't think that all of this is going on, really. But I think having some diversity on the panels is certainly part of it. Having recruitment training for people is part of it, Reg. But also sort of challenging yourself on what the requirements are and what your expectations are, I think.
Thanks, David. I guess the old saying is never judge a book by its cover, right? Another one, really specific one for you, David, from one of our key members, Robert Fisher, that have you come across age discrimination? And
oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, there's no such thing as, is there, you know, retirement age, right? We're working longer, we're living longer.
Massive age discrimination. I think a lot of older workers really get this, and also young people as well. You see, it cuts in so many different ways, and it's not always conscious. So I see a lot with younger women where assumptions will be made because people look younger, that they haven't got the experience, and it's often worded around, would they have credibility, would they have standing, would they be persuasive in that sort of setting. in a way that you don't always see with men. So I see that as a sort of gender and age thing quite often there. But older workers, certainly, we have a number of older workers, and increasingly have been recruiting new staff who are older workers as well, and people who may have worked in completely different backgrounds. So really, there's a whole talent pool out there, but people are very often written off. And I think it's just stupid. It's really so stupid. But I think it really does play an awful lot.
I've got another question for you from Cameron Clover. Basically, he just said, great presentation, as agreed, David. I think all our members here. He just said that he can't stress you as a charity CEO how much they miss you as a regulator to the ACNC. Both at the ACFA and the ACNC.
It's a challenge, isn't it, Stephen?
These acronyms. I need a dictionary. You've been able to shape the culture of your workforce early on. I guess the question is, would you approach diversity and inclusion considerations amongst an established organisation as you were in a new entity?
Well, I think with the ACNC, with the Charity Commission, we recruited everybody from scratch. The tax office said, oh no, we'll give you all your people. We've got lots of people we can give you. And we said, well, thank you very much. I'm sure some of them are great. I'm sure some of them may not be, but we're going to recruit all our own people. So we recruited there. It was a full startup, and we recruited everybody from scratch. And so we were able to sort of factor some of that in. With AFCA, we brought together 3 organizations. So 3 established organizations, 2 previous ombudsman schemes, and 1 was the Superannuation Complaints Tribunal. So it wasn't, although it's a setup, we had probably started with about 400 staff, existing staff from previous organizations. So a lot of that has been about changing the culture and trying to get a single culture as well across different offices and different cities. In both Sydney and Melbourne, but also there you've got different cultures. So you've got new people, you've got the 3 old organisations, you've got the whole Sydney Melbourne thing, and how do you try and bring together as one single culture? I would approach equality and diversity in a very similar way. I think for me there, the challenge was about recognising the contribution of everybody. Whether they were new into the organisation or whether they'd worked in the predecessor bodies. And I've seen CEOs come in and rubbish everything that happened before. And then 12 months later, they've done a rebranding. 12 months later, everything's changed. Everything's amazing. Everything before was rubbish. I've seen this so many times. It's absolutely appalling. And it's untrue. And it creates such terrible problems really as well. So it's really about, even though you're changing things and you're setting something up new, it's about respecting that everything you're doing is on the shoulders of what's been done before as well. It's all about respect. I fundamentally believe, Stephen, a lot of this is, I think it's the same with customer service, it's the same with leadership, it's the same with management, it's the same with the quality. It's how would you in that situation feel?
And you've got to care, right, David?
How would you in that situation feel? How would you, if you were that customer with that background, how would you feel? You know, how would you, this employee, how would you feel if you spent 10, 20 years working in an organization? It's now being merged into something else, and people haven't got a good word to say about what you've been doing for the last 20 years. It's pretty bloody obvious how you're going to feel, isn't it? And then everything's all shiny and new and wonderful. It's pretty obvious how you're going to feel. Most people would feel exactly the same way. And it's the same with the other things as well. How do you really, how do people really feel as though they belong? Well, you've got to be seen, first of all. People have got to know who you are, and you've got to be respected, really.
Just over back to Cameron, was there anything else you wanted to ask directly to David?
No, thanks, David. And David, as always, excellent presentation, and you know, you're clearly doing some great work where you are, and certainly the finance, well, the public's gain as you take on the finance sector is the charity sector's loss. But Keep up the good work and thanks.
Oh, that's very generous, Cameron. Thank you.
Over to another question. Bev Brock, did you want to ask your question for David?
David, in terms of appointing new board members for a different organisation, a different charity, a lot of our people that we work with express the fact that, you know, our board is not diverse because they take it on physical appearance. So unless you have colour, unless you look differently, it's not perceived that you are diverse, because, you know, we consider age, we consider experience, we consider cultural background, all of those things, but the perception is often that we're not diverse enough. Now, is it acceptable to actually ask for photos, to actually ask certain questions? You know, I was under the impression that you literally cannot ask certain questions or make specifications when you are giving out the job description. And that makes it difficult. So where does the rule, you know, how does it apply in this day and age?
I certainly don't think you should be asking for photographs or information in a identifiable way, Bev. I think that's a recipe for all sorts of problems, and I think it would be seen as very threatening by people as well. I think what I would say to boards is really you should do a skills audit and you know, have a look at really at both the skills that you need, but also the different backgrounds and experience that people have. I think if you recognize, though, that actually, you know, looking at demographics, that there isn't great diversity, whether that's around race or whether that's around sort of other cultural background, then there's no problem in actually in adverts and things saying, you know, we are underrepresented and we are particularly encourage applications from people from different communities. I mean, that's a positive thing. At the end of the day, you have to recruit who's best really for the board and really the skills that you're looking for. But sometimes by putting a positive statement like that when you are actually recruiting, it sends an indication to people, oh, actually, well, maybe this is an organization that would be interested in me, or maybe it is an organization that I could apply for or that would be welcoming to me. So I think it's sometimes about those sorts of messages, Bev, that really can help in terms of proactive recruitment. And at the end of the day, as you said, diversity is around a whole range of different things. But, you know, I think if you do have people with different backgrounds and different experiences, you've probably got a richer talent set on your board.
We certainly do that. We certainly have, you know, a very, you know, our skills for our board, but somehow it ends up that, you know, if you're not visually appear to represent different races and cultures, you're not considered to be diverse and inclusive. Well, the statement, I agree with you, the statement that we make before that is essential.
I think it's not just about composition of board. It's also about, how do you engage with different communities? Do you have focus groups? Do you have user groups? Do you have, you know, board composition is one way, but there's also other ways to get engagement from hard to reach communities. So even if you don't have that, it's how do you engage and what mechanisms do you have to engage with other communities would be my challenge. Statistically, you are much more likely to sit on a charity board if you are over 60. There was a statistic that Susan Pascoe, the former charity commissioner, used to have. I'm not sure if it was reliable, but she used to say something like, I think you're 25 times more likely to be over the age of 70 than you are under the age of 25 on a not-for-profit board. And whether that was quite right, I'm not sure, but statistically, it's certainly you're much more likely to be an older person. You're much more likely to be from particular backgrounds. And also, you're much more likely not to be working, to be honest, or not to be working full time, because often people can't afford that, and so that can be a challenge as well in terms of getting diversity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bev. And thank you, David, again. We've got 2 more questions, but we might send you them separately and hopefully can come back. But again, thank you very much. And thank you to all our members for their questions this evening. And David, your responses, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and keep up the great work that you do at Rotary. It's been a real pleasure to join you.
I'll now hand over to Claire. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. And I'd also like to express my thanks to you, David, for a very insightful presentation. And we're very appreciative to you for sharing your time and experiences with us tonight. As a token of our gratitude, you will be receiving a pair of limited edition R100 Centenary socks, which are 100% Australian made in Preston by past President Phil Endersby's Wilderness Wear. So watch out for those in the mail.
Fantastic.
And I'll now pass the meeting to President Reg for notices and closing.
Thanks enormously, Claire. I've just got a few small notices this week before we close the meeting. The first thing I wanted to mention in notices was the ideas workshop that we conducted successfully on Sunday afternoon. More than 20 people attended, despite our worry that people would want to be out and about and our lockdown is ending. And we got together to think about ideas for impactful projects that will serve the needs that have emerged as a result of and during the COVID pandemic. With the help of a challenging address from a prominent futurist, Paul Higgins, our work focused on 4 key themes. Firstly, addressing the widening inequality in the community following the COVID outbreak, the need to continue developing Rotary's culture and leadership, very relevant to this presentation, to be more outward looking and inclusive, and projects that demonstrate measurable impact, stronger focused on them, and then particularly focusing on our region, the Indo-Pacific, and climate change in that context. A memorable takeaway quote for me highlighted the inevitability of change. Uncertainty is an uncomfortable position, but certainty is an absurd one. Small working groups are currently preparing a discussion paper on the recommended actions following the workshop, and we'll have those available later this month. The second is the annual Paul Harris Breakfast. This month is Rotary Worldwide's Foundation Month, and we focus on supporting the foundation in funding impactful humanitarian services projects all over the world where they're most needed. Rotary Central Melbourne and District 9800 invite you to join the annual Paul Harris Breakfast for the Rotary Foundation. Guest speaker, Georgie Harmon, the CEO of Beyond Blue, will be there. It's online. The event is on Tuesday, the 23rd of November, and begins at 7:30 a.m. for 7:40 till 9 o'clock, proceeds to the Rotary Foundation. Details will be in this week's bulletin. The third thing is the big news for me, really, and something I've been really gratefully looking forward to, and that's returning to in-person meetings. Next week's weekly luncheon meeting will be at the Sofitel in number 35. It's going to be the first of our hybrid meetings, so that people will have the option of participating either in person or virtually. Our guest speaker will be welcoming us back, and that's Lord Mayor Sally Capp, talking about the state of the city, as she does with us every year. Bookings via Humanitix are absolutely essential. We'll have our new AV equipment on the day, and this will enable us to live stream the meeting on Zoom as well as in person.